coordinate for refugees, and I'm pleased to be here today with Jacob and Jess, who are both joining us from Samos. I've asked Jacob and Jess to join us today because of what's been happening in Samos over the past literally 4 days. On Friday, they were struck with an earthquake that was magnitude 7 on the scale, which is enormous. And just last night, there was a fire in the Bati refugee camp. So I've asked Jacob, who is co-founder of Action for Education and Europe Must Act, and Jess, who's co-founder of Project Harmonia in Samos, to join us today just to share their experiences of what's been going on there. So yeah, would you be able to start? I don't mind which one of you're there together. Would you be able to start by explaining what happened on Friday and how the earthquake actually impacted you? Jacob, do you want to go first, perhaps?
Yeah, for sure. And Amber, thanks so much for setting this up firstly. And I might add that the last 4 days have been just hugely turbulent on Samos, but of course it comes after a year of utter kind of travesty after travesty, from violence at the beginning of the year to the virus, multiple fires, and now this kind of last set of incidents, which is really taking not only the refugee community but the local community and the community of volunteers and NGOs working here right to the edge. But last Friday, um, about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I think it was, we were just struck by an enormous earthquake. Um, as far as I remember, it lasted about 10, 15 seconds, and it shook everything across the city and the buildings. Um, and it passed, and there was obviously just a lot of fright, a lot of commotion, and for a period after, people I think weren't quite sure what to do. A lot of us headed down into the city. There was a lot of talk of gathering on the waterfront where people felt safer because there weren't buildings. And that's where people were staying for about 10, 15 minutes until people started also clearly getting concerned about the chance of a tsunami hitting. Of course, Samos is right on the water's front. There's very little kind of protection from the sea. It's a quiet port. Small Greek fishing boats use it, and as people were standing on the waterfront, suddenly the water level rose a couple of meters, and water kind of rushed over onto the road and to the shops, and a lot of people at that point started really running for higher ground. Some people had already gone to higher ground, but this created a moment of panic. A lot of people moved very quickly. Um, Now that water, it didn't there wasn't a big wave, and that water receded, but not before it did quite substantial damage to a lot of the businesses and the shops, especially in the lower part of the town, and in the businesses closest to the waterfront. And then the hours that followed were just a process of waiting to see if there were further shocks, a process of waiting to see if there'd be more waves that might hit the town. And since then, that's really been the state that we've been in. We've been experiencing so many tremors and aftershocks. I think well more than 100 of them.
Really?
All of it much smaller than the initial quake, but still enough to create a lot of fear and panic. And um, I mean, maybe Jess, yeah, you can also talk a bit about what people have gone, where people have gone, and what they're doing now.
Yeah. So most locals were warned to sleep in their car for at least 48 hours. Some houses were completely destroyed. A lot of people don't have insurance. So a lot of locals were in a really tough position. Um,
Okay, we appear to be frozen for a moment, but hopefully we'll get Jacob and Jess back. There we are. Sorry, you froze
wait,
for a moment, but if you'd just like to repeat that.
where do we get up to?
Just the locals not being insured and many of them being encouraged to sleep in their cars for 48 hours.
Yeah, because there was a big risk of aftershock. So a lot of locals are now waiting to get their structures checked to see if they're safe to go back to. A lot of them aren't. There are huge cracks in the sides of buildings. A lot of them in the main shopping streets have completely collapsed. Unfortunately, there were 2 teenagers who were on their way home from school who were killed. They're actually one of the children that died are our neighbours, and their family are really grief struck. The funerals have already happened. But yeah, there's a lot of, it's very derelict, very eerie in the town. People are just trying to put things back together, but it's very uncertain when things will get back to normal, so to speak.
Has the water level gone back down now?
Yeah, it was up and
Yeah.
down for a couple of hours. You could see it from the hill, and it completely covered the port on the waterfront. And it was unstable for a long time, so people were really afraid to go back down the hill. But yeah, now it's pretty stable.
And what about the Banana House and Project Ammonia? Have you suffered any cracks, any damage to the building?
Well, we've been speaking for Action for Education and Banana House. We've been quite fortunate, even though both of our organisations work very close to the waterfront. We didn't have any damage, and most of our buildings are in what seems to be okay shape. We have a number of apartments that house volunteers across the city, and again, thankfully, they seem okay. We do have one apartment up in the old town, and that old town has been really, really badly shaken by the earthquake. A lot of the buildings there, which are anyway probably hundreds of years old, are closer to a state of, um, I guess, falling down. So it's quite dangerous to walk around at the moment, and there's a lot of red tape everywhere, stopping access to buildings that have big cracks that are leaning. And it's just a slow process of engineers going around checking the stability of different buildings. And I suppose what's going to happen in the coming weeks is that a lot of buildings will be taken down to avoid them possibly falling in an uncontrolled manner.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and there are a lot. There've been camps set up for locals. There've been camps set up for locals. One in the stadium, quite close to us. Yeah, everything is so uncertain. The Anavathi area that Jacob was mentioning, they had advice to evacuate because it's so unstable up there. But yeah, we've been very lucky here, but this town is in ruins, really.
Which is incredible, isn't it? I mean, for those of us who know it so well, you guys in particular, it's really bizarre to think of this happening. I don't think it's the first time there's been an earthquake for Samos. It's not a new thing for them, but this seems to be quite devastating, the effects that it's had.
I mean, Greece is actually the 6th most seismic country in the world, and the most seismic country in Europe, as far as I'm aware.
Wow.
But it seems like this is a much bigger earthquake than's been experienced locally for a long, long time.
And
yeah,
it's 5 or 4 was the last one, so this is the strongest in over 100 years.
Wow.
And I think for businesses that this year have already suffered so much, suffered from being closed for months, suffered from years of a declining tourist industry. This is just one more setback that's costing thousands upon thousands of euros, and is continuing to relegate this North Aegean community further away. And it's a really difficult place when we know people locally.
Of course it is, and it's really soon after it happening. It only happened on Friday, but is there talk of the government stepping in and coming to help the people of Samos, or is there no mention of that yet? Does it feel like they're going to get support from Europe and Greece, or does it feel like you're on your own?
Right now, there's not a huge amount of information. It's still feels very fresh. I think there's talk of setting up a local fundraiser for the community, but people are just trying to do their best to stay safe because there's still a lot of aftershocks, and find places to sleep and try and rebuild their buildings and clean out their businesses, because most of the businesses in Samos are all on the waterfront, so they had a lot of damage from the mini tsunami that came in. So there's been a process of trying to clean up, try and pick up the pieces. And I think in the coming weeks, then we'll see what happens with how much Samos gets supported.
Yeah,
But I
exactly.
think generally, if you're here, there is a sense of calm. It wasn't frantic at any point. There was the initial panic, but generally people have responded very slowly and quietly, and there is a sense that local communities are kind of repairing what they can at different shops. Today, a lot of smaller businesses did open if they weren't too badly hit. Um, and yeah, I mean, I don't think we're going to see any big government intervention. And that might partly be because there's not a huge need right now. It might be that the local community does manage to pull together. But that process will take a lot of time.
Yeah,
Which was
very
also
understandably.
huge.
It was also, sorry.
Oh, sorry. A huge hit financially because of COVID. Everyone here on an island relies on tourism, which has been massively down because of COVID. And now this, and I think the people on this island, the locals, are really going to suffer as a result of this and COVID. And winter, they don't have a lot of income, so it's going to be a really tough few months in future for them.
And if I was going to say, if there is a fundraiser raised by the local people, then please do share it, because I think so many people are familiar with Samos because of the refugee crisis, and I'm sure that they'll want to help the local community as best they can as well. So moving on to last night's events, my understanding is that the fire started at about 4 o'clock in the morning. There's mixed reports on sort of how much of the camp has been destroyed, but it looks to me like about a quarter of it, maybe the tented area, and maybe 200 or so people have been displaced, maybe a little more. Can you explain what you know of last night's events and the fire? And I'm just going to put a picture of the fire up and hope it doesn't freeze the video. But go for it.
Okay. It was about 4 a.m., 4:30. Then we started getting reports because at Armonia we have a huge community volunteer team, about 40 of them. So we start getting messages in and videos of this fire, which is not clear how it started yet. And then in front of the camp, there is a piece of land. So people start gathering there, coming down from the camp. Got put out by the fire department in about an hour. And luckily with the winds, it didn't get carried up the hill too far. So it did a lot of damage, but it could have been a lot worse. And then within the NGO community, we all met, a lot of people who were awake, and we all clubbed together, met at the bottom of the camp, and then we distributed some emergency blankets, water, masks, because obviously everyone's mingling and everyone's crowding together. Also, we're still we've had an earthquake, a mini tsunami, and now this fire. It doesn't stop, and this is not the first fire that we've had here. And then there's points that the police stop letting people out of camp, and then people get frightened, it gets even more tense, and there's more risk of stuff like this happening again.
So in terms of,
I mean,
we don't know what started. Sorry, Jacob, on you go.
No. Well, it seems like there's just a slow and unfortunate rhythm to these fires that are breaking out across all the islands. And I mean, it's over a year ago that first major fire happened on Samos. And this kind of what probably can be understood as a protest against the camp construction is a really unfortunate, an unfortunate form of action, because it's destroying a lot of people's possessions, their homes, and it's kind of a game that's played with authorities that to some extent will never give in to clearly what this is trying to demonstrate, which is that camps shouldn't exist here, because the authorities also know that if they are to create any mass transfer to the mainland in the wake of such a fire, then there's going to be just a whole series of copycat attempts across all the camps. So it puts everyone in a really difficult position where aid is given, places are rebuilt, only to be burnt down again, aid to be given again. We find ourselves in a circle where basically, I mean, this policy isn't working, but the policy is creating these cycles of suffering.
Yeah. So in terms of today, are the numbers about right? Is it about 200 who've lost their tents? And what's happening to them? Because it's dark with you already. It's already 20 past 8. What's happening with them tonight?
So there were tents distributed by NGOs here, and then people had to go back to camp. So they have to rebuild their tents, their structures again. It's still sunny here, but it's getting really cold at nights. So people have now just been left with flimsy tents, a sleeping bag, if they were lucky to get enough, because it's very hard to distribute in these chaotic situations. So yeah, and it's again, people just lose. It's particularly in this area of the camp. This is where the fire was last time, and people resettle usually in the same places. So people have just lost their possessions over and over and over again, and they just have to continue fleeing and be in this constant state of fear and anxiety. So I think that quite a few people have tents or at least blankets for tonight, but they're just forced to go back to camp, which is completely unsafe, unsanitary, and every structure is so cramped. There's no fire breaks, so if it happens again, it spreads so quickly, and more people lose their homes.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. What can we do to help? We started a small fundraiser this morning. It was unclear exactly what was happening. We've raised about £1,500. What's the best way of being able to help in the coming days?
Well, I think there's a few ways of taking solid action in light of this. I mean, donating is always a really useful way, and that it might not be that the money donated right now is paying for the blanket that's given out to a family, but unfortunately, as we notice, with the repetition of this situation, this is half as much about replenishing those emergency stocks. So next time, once again, people can step in and people can respond when this happens. And that's really vital. And Samos has a really great network of distribution organizations that do give out aid in a really timely way, in a really fair way. And those stocks will take a hit, giving out these blankets, these sleeping bags, these tents. So a donation does support that directly. But I think there's other kinds of actions. There's continuously just advocating and talking to politicians on a national level. And I mean, I can remind everyone that we're in the middle of a period of consultation around the new European Pact on Migration. And at this point, this pact is going to be voted on by the heads of member states. And even though the UK may not have a seat at that table going forward, nevertheless, we're part of a wider European community, and we need to be continuously advocating at the highest level to prime ministers, to presidents, to make it clear that our voices can be heard, and that our voice is that these kinds of structures, these kinds of policies don't represent us. And that will only happen if people talk up and share their voice. So there are many ways of contacting MPs and contacting prime ministers or presidents. And I think possibly Choose Love has an ongoing one, but there's many organizations that have this option. And it could also just be useful to reach out to a local MP and draw their attention to this fire, draw their attention to the UK's role in also taking in unaccompanied children, and how they've basically gone against that recently, and how this whole policy should be reversed.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really valid point, and it's something that we all need to do better at. It's now nearly 20 minutes in, and I'm going to draw it to a close, but I really want to thank you both for joining us today, and also for all of the work and efforts that you're doing on Samos. I know. Did you freeze there? I just wanted to thank you for everything that you're doing. I'd love to be over there with you and lending a hand, and I'm not. I'm 1,000 miles away instead. So you have to work for all of us, and keep carrying the flag. And we're just really sad. It's such a horrible thing to have happened to Samos, and it's a very sad time. So stay strong, and you've obviously still got each other, which is great. And hopefully we'll come over and see you and help soon as well. But thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Jess. It's lovely for me to see both of you. And you've got hellos from Sarah Griffith and Sally Hyman on the messages so far, but we've had quite a few people watching. So thanks very much, and keep us posted on what we can do to help. Yeah.